Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming to our media briefing this morning. Time is a bit tight for us, so we'll get started right away. Let me introduce our Interim Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Mcknight, who will introduce our other guests this morning. Dr. Mcknight.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming together today. I called a press conference today to provide our community with an update on the COVID-19 cases in our communities and how our schools are planning to respond to the rising cases that we are seeing. I'm fortunate today to be joined here by Mr. Jimmy DeAndrea, the Chief of Staff for MCPS, and Ms. Rochelle Rubin, Chief of Teaching, Learning, and Schools. And as always, we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. James Bridgers, the Acting Chief Health Officer from the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS. MCPS has partnered with DHHS through every single step of this pandemic, and their recommendations have guided MCPS actions over the last 21 months. So we will continue to work closely with them as we work through this process. As we have confronted the coronavirus, I must say that we have continued to remain grounded in prioritizing student health and safety, while also mitigating any learning disruption that have resulted from the pandemic. Throughout the winter break, which did begin on December 23rd, MCPS has been closely monitoring the reported positive cases of COVID-19. Now, with that said, I know I did a press conference before the break, but I want to thank our families and staff for doing exactly what we requested, which was to self-report data on whether they or their children have tested positive for the virus. I mentioned it being a community effort in my last press conference, and this is an exact example of exactly how we have to depend on one another to act on accurate information that we have to plan appropriately for our schools. So as of 6 a.m. on Monday, January 3rd, 5,680 students and staff reported having tested positive for COVID-19 over the winter break, including a rise of 4,677 reported cases during the last 5 days of winter break. We are concerned by the surge in our cases that represent positive cases within our schools, and this absolutely reflects the trend that we're seeing across the Washington, D.C. region. We also are keeping in mind that this rise will have an acute impact on our workforce. Many of our employees are testing positive for COVID-19. Now, this is resulting in abnormally high staff absences across our school system, including among teachers, bus drivers, and cafeteria workers. These absences are difficult to accommodate in light of existing staffing shortages, which may result in further adjustments to classroom staffing, bus routes, and other parts of operations. And I think it's important to share that with our community, because when we think about operation of a school system, we really have to look at all of these spaces and how we provide services to students in all of these spaces. In the face of this increase, I must say that we have remained committed to doing every single thing in our power to keep our schools open for in-person learning in a way that maintains student, staff, and community health and safety. And I continue to mention that because as we work through this pandemic, there are a number of information that we continue to depend on, which says that we have to be very flexible in how we plan. And as we review individual school data, there are some key factors that we continue to consider and include. We look at the number of students who are testing positive, the number of staff testing positive, the number of students in quarantine, the number of staff at the school who are out due to COVID-related absences, and the level of spread of the virus in the school and the community. And in order for us to identify levels of COVID-19 in each of our individual schools, last week I shared with the media and with our families that we were posting on our website the number of cases that we would have available so that we would provide transparency. We're now also going to sort schools into 3 color-coded categories: green, yellow, and red. And those categories are going to identify whether individual schools have reached the 5% threshold and are approaching the 5% threshold or remain well below the 5% threshold. And to explain that more specifically, in the schools that are categorized as green, under 3% of students and staff would have reported testing positive for COVID-19 within the last 4 days. In schools that are categorized as yellow, over 3% and under 5% of students and staff would have reported testing positive for COVID-19 within the last 14 days. In schools that are categorized as red, over 5% of the students and staff would have reported testing positive for COVID-19 in the last 14 days. We've made a decision to distinguish between these categories because COVID-19 management does not take a one-size-fits-all approach. When schools reach the 5% threshold and enter the red category, we will then confer with the Department of Health and Human Services about the best next steps, including the possibility that the school transitions to 14 days of virtual learning. The transition to virtual learning is not an automatic decision or a guarantee. And so I mention that because the conversation and collaboration that will happen between the two units, DHHS and Montgomery County, are critical in this process. But currently, there are 11 schools in MCPS that have reached the 5% threshold and entered the red category. Those schools are Rock Terrace School, Cannon Road Elementary School, North Chevy Chase Elementary School, Hallie Wells Middle School, Monocacy Elementary School, Roberto Clemente Middle School, Robert Knowles Elementary School, Waters Landing Elementary School, Rosemont Elementary School, Seneca Valley High School, Sherwood Elementary School. These 11 schools will transition to 14 days of virtual learning effective tomorrow, January 5th. MCPS leadership has been in contact with the school leadership teams, and the school community should expect additional communication later today. We do intend for schools that transition to virtual learning to return to in-person learning after the defined 14-day period of virtual instruction. I've mentioned this before. In our effort to keep our schools open, we also know that we will have to remain flexible. And in order to manage keeping safe schools while we are also operating and protecting the learning interests of our students, this could result in us making some changes, meaning students having to quarantine or us having to move specifically to a virtual instruction platform. So we have 89 schools that are currently in the yellow category, meaning that they are between 3% and 5% with their staff and students having reported positive for COVID-19. The heightened levels of COVID-19 in these school communities mean that they are approaching the 5% threshold that would put them in the red category. To closely monitor the spread of the virus, we will provide rapid tests from the county to every student in all of our schools, and we will start with the schools with elevated levels of COVID-19. Those schools that are in the yellow or red categories, where at least 3% of staff and students have tested positive for COVID-19 in the last 14 days, will receive continued information. Once we receive the test from the county, providing them, the students, for at-home instruction will keep the school community safe because testing throughout the entire school community will reveal the true levels of COVID-19 in these school communities. We're also partnering with DHHS to offer expanded testing when possible to schools that are in a period of 14-day virtual learning. Schools in the green category, where under 3% of students and staff have reported testing positive for COVID-19, will remain open for in-person learning. We will continue to monitor closely the COVID-19 spread in all of our schools and make a commitment to communicate with you. When it is possible to do so safely, we must continue to preserve the in-person learning experience and mitigate the learning disruptions that the pandemic has already caused. In the majority of our schools, in-person learning can and will continue with mitigation measures that keep schools safe and lower transmission rates. Those measures include our mask mandate, and we are enhancing that mask mandate through providing all staff with KN95 masks this week. We're distributing rapid tests and providing screening testing in schools in order to identify and remove students who are positive for COVID-19 from the school environment. Improving ventilation has been a part of our commitment starting as early as last spring. When we returned to school last spring, MCPS assessed and upgraded air filtration systems and improved ventilation in all schools to ensure the health and safety of students and staff. All schools needed a filtration upgrade received one. Community members can find more information about the nature of their individual schools' ventilation projects on the MCPS website. That information remains there, and we hope that information continues to build confidence in our community, knowing that we invested in these mitigation efforts in the spring and will continue to do so. We're also minimizing indoor capacity by not allowing spectators at our sporting events. All of these steps continue to require a community effort. We will need our families to continue to report any positive cases, which families can do right at the top of our MCPS website. We ask that children continue to get tested for COVID-19 if possible and when presenting symptoms. Keep children at home and get them tested if they are presenting symptoms. And always remember to please participate in our Say Yes to the Test by consenting to testing, which we will be increasing in our schools over the weeks to come. We remain committed to keeping students, staff, families, and community partners informed by making sure the data is available and letting you know what decisions are made regarding COVID-19 and operation in each of our school communities. By 7 p.m., every school that is in session, we will post an update of reported positive cases by school and indicate whether, based on the percentage of students and staff who have tested positive, which schools fall in the green, yellow, or red categories. We really do appreciate in advance your understanding and patience as we navigate this pandemic while striving to maintain safety and support teaching and learning as a priority. I'm now going to ask Ms. Rubin to share about what the transition to the 14 days of virtual learning will look like and the communication that has been shared with principals who will then be in touch with their communities. Ms. Rubin?
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Mcknight. As Dr. Mcknight iterated, our commitment to our schools surround keeping our students and staff safe, and their safety, health, and well-being are top priorities. We also are very much committed to the instructional learning that we know has to take place, and that is extremely important when we consider the mitigating learning loss goals that we have set for ourselves as a district. So with that in mind, we have created an extremely robust plan as well as communication process to address the transition of those schools that will need to do so over the next few weeks and months as we consider and continue to monitor the advance of the COVID-19 continuing health crisis in our district and certainly across the nation. Our plan entails a robust communication to all schools as well as our parent community. Over the winter break, we started communicating to schools. As Dr. Mcknight mentioned, we watched the data and how the metrics were developing. In that time, we were able to begin communication with our school principals to say, if something happens, we are laying out the plan for exactly how this will look. So currently, we yesterday had our first district-wide principal meeting where we were able to lay out the 3 phases of our response plan. Individually, those schools that are impacted, you heard the 11 that were mentioned, they additionally received communication. There's a meeting that is planned for today that will outline for those schools exactly what the support will look like for central services. Parents and families and community members that are impacted for those schools transitioning to the 14-day virtual platform will receive detailed and outlined communication that will walk them through exactly what the process will look like for that time period, which includes a 1-day transition process that allows both our staff members and our families to have the ability to prepare for the 14-day platform virtually. That will be an asynchronous day where we will provide the choice board opportunities for all of our students. Those are ready to go, ready to be deployed. The very next day, what parents and families and the community members can expect is synchronous live instruction during the entire 14-day period of virtual. We'll continue to work during that time in tandem with our partners in HHS, as you heard mentioned by Dr. Mcknight earlier, to engage in that robust testing. From the school side, what families can expect from the teacher component, live instruction, as I mentioned, but also a partnership with our central office curriculum and instruction program, as well as our school support and improvement department. That will look like helping to support teachers in their planning, working alongside teachers co-teaching in the classroom to ensure that we do not lose any more of the momentum, the great momentum that we gained during our 5-day in-person return to school. On the student engagement side, what our families can expect is that our Student and Family Support and Engagement Office, as well as our Office of Special Education, will be partnered very closely with our parents to anticipate any issues, to address any challenges, including attendance, student engagement. We want those things to continue and to be robust. So we've been working on a detailed plan as to how that support will look. Our Student and Family Support and Engagement Office is also very much prepared to address any family issues that are available, be it technology, be it support for in-home, et cetera. We're available to address those needs and to work alongside our families to ensure that this process is as seamless as possible. The other thing that I did want to mention is that the transition process will be identified, as you heard Dr. Mcknight mentioned earlier. We're closely looking at the metrics. We will be closely working with those schools who are in the yellow to ensure that if and when there is a time where they need to transition to the virtual platform, there will be adequate notice provided. And as we mentioned, there is a process that we're going through to make that identification. But we want to be transparent about the fact that we're working daily, analyzing the metrics daily, and we have a robust plan in place that entails the 3 phases that you heard me mention before to ensure that this is a seamless process, that the learning and the instruction continues, and that we appropriately transition students back into the school platform following the 14-day virtual learning period.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rubin. I'm also grateful for the partnership with Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. And again, we have Dr. Bridges here with us this morning. I will ask Dr. Bridges, as our acting county health officer, to share any additional updates that you may have before we take questions.
Sure. Good morning, Dr. Mcknight. Thank you again for your team's resiliency to work through this. COVID didn't take a break during the holidays, and neither did we. As you and Ms. Rubin indicated, we worked daily throughout the holiday break to assess the data, to work with the Maryland State Department of Education and the Maryland Department of Health to review those metrics, to review the outbreak data, and to look at community level transmission and spread. These are unprecedented times with the new variant and its transmission rates. Currently, the test positivity rate in the state of Maryland is around 26%. Montgomery's county rate is around 25%. Usually over the past year and a half, our test positivity rate has been half of what the state has presented, and we continue to monitor the data. That's just an indication of the community level spread. We will continue to work with MCPS to look at all of those criteria set forth by the Maryland State Department of Education and the Maryland Department of Health to mitigate any further transmission. We've been working with the Maryland Department of Health's K through testing team to assess and use their criteria that they have set forth for outbreak investigating, including investigating of those outbreaks in 2 or more cohorts in schools with low vaccination rates, especially in those school settings involving younger students who aren't eligible for vaccinations, and investigating ongoing and uncontrolled transmission. As you indicated, Dr. Mcknight, you and your team, MCPS is looking at the school inclusive from a community perspective. That includes students, the educators, and staff. And we're looking at those ongoing transmission rates for all of those individuals. Now, there's been a lot of discussion around CDC's recent quarantine and isolation guidelines, and MSDE and MDH has not provided any additional isolation or quarantine guidance for infection prevention and control, including school settings and childcare settings and colleges and university. Until that time, MDH recommends that we continue to follow the recommendations outlined in the current guidance available for those settings, ensuring adherence to all applicable state and federal orders and regulations, which is currently a 4-day quarantine in an outbreak setting. But as you indicated, these guidelines may change as MSDE and MDH continues to identify the best practice for school settings. And so we will use those settings, use those guidelines as they are set forth. I want to thank you again for allowing me just a few minutes just to provide that update, and we will continue to monitor the data and the science and apply it accordingly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bridgers. Okay, Mr. Cram, we'll turn it back to you to facilitate questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mcknight. Ms. Rubin, if we could ask you, please, to just review some of your high points there. We were receiving notices that many in our audience could not hear what you were saying. If you would just talk about the supports that you've been providing to schools to get ready for this.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
I think it's better now. There was a YouTube buffering issue.
Okay, thank you. So again, to reiterate the supports, I want to start off by saying we are ready to support our schools through this transition process. The first is that we've already met with all of our principals. We've had one principal drop-in session already, but that communication began over the break. I do want to reiterate that. The second, those principals who are immediately impacted, those 11 schools that you heard Dr. Mcknight name, have already been communicated with. We've met with them. They understand the plan for how the transition will work, and that support and communication will be ongoing throughout this process. The first step is that there will be a 1-day transition period that occurs prior to, there's a 1-day transition period, which will count as part of the 14 days. I want to reiterate and be clear about that. So that 1 day is asynchronous learning. We have all of our choice board activities and instructional activities for our students to engage in during that 1-day transitional period. That allows for our staff members to be prepared, as well as for our families to make some preparation and decisions around what needs to happen to facilitate the virtual platform instructional process at home for their particular students. The second piece of that is that the learning is live synchronous learning. So students are going through their regular school day. They're just doing it on a virtual platform. At the central services level, we are prepared to support our teachers by having our curriculum and instructional program, as well as school support and improvement directors, instructional specialists, et cetera, really partner with our teachers as they make this transition so that we're able to maintain the momentum that we've gained over the last few months from in-person learning. Additionally, we will have our Student and Family Support and Engagement Office, as well as our Office of Special Education, directly working through our well-being teams in the system to support our students and families around issues of attendance, issues of technology, any sort of sustainability issues they have, be it housing, et cetera. Whatever the supports are that our families need, our offices are ready to support them to ensure that students are able to seamlessly continue their instructional process throughout this 14-day period.
Thank you, Ms. Rubens, and thank you for bringing that back up again. That's important information for our audience to have heard. So to our members of the media, if you would please raise your electronic hand, we can get to a few of your questions. And thank you for your patience. Mr. Fredericks.
Good morning. Some students, families, and staff at these non-red schools are nervous about going back. What do you say to them?
Thank you for that question. So as we've managed through this pandemic, and I truly understand this as a parent, as a community member, I understand that there are fears and concerns about students coming back to school. I also am very aware that we are in 20 months of managing this pandemic. 20 months, and we constantly have seen and learned about what the impact has been on students when we are not able to provide them in-person learning. Now, I understand that every family have conversations and they may share the things that they're very much concerned about. But I do ask that our parents trust us in understanding that all of the research speaks to when you address mitigation methods that are going to be helpful to our schools, really addressing ventilation systems, wearing the mask, and absolutely making sure that we have testing programs, which is why we're in close alignment with our Department of Health and Human Services and our county government, who have been fantastic at being able to help us access those tests. Those are the things that will allow us to be able to protect the interests to do both, keep our students in school and yet keep them safe. And if we deem that it is an environment in which we need to intervene to manage the spread of COVID-19, then we will do so, which is exactly our reason for being here today and sharing that in some of our schools, we think we need to put some additional measures in place.
Thank you, Dr. Mcknight. Mr. Gregory from Channel 9.
Hey, how are you? Thank you guys so much. Hope you can hear me. Just a quick question. Looking at how some of the other districts are handling things around the area, we saw that DC is waiting 2 days until Thursday to bring students back in by allowing them to test for 2 days. Was there any thought to doing something like that over break, of sending out or getting as many test kits out to the kids as possible to see what the flow looked like? And if not, why was this decision made as opposed to one like that?
I think I may have heard some of your question, but just let me know if I didn't get all of it. I believe you were asking why were we making a decision to return to school, and when other districts may have made a decision to wait until testing was in place. I shared with some of the media last week, our system relies heavily on the readily availability of resources. As I'm sure you saw throughout the winter break, probably every single school system in the nation was trying to figure out a way in which they could access testing kits, whatever it may be, and had done this weeks out to prepare for the opening of school. And so we really wanted to do two things: make sure that we were making a decision that was differentiated so that we were treating every school appropriately based on the information that we had. If we close down as a district, and I say this representing the largest school district in the state of Maryland, that would be 209 schools. And if there are some schools who are not impacted by the transmission rate of COVID-19 in the same way, then how are we helping them by preventing them from being able to have in-person learning, which we know is the best method of teaching and learning to help our children? And so we wanted to be very differentiated in our thought around how we would support schools to keep them safe and healthy, but at the same time, protect the interests of teaching and learning. And so that will continue to be our focus here in Montgomery County Public Schools as we go and move through this process of what we shared today, which is what is the process and the plan for how we look at our schools, and how will our public be aware of what that is as well?
Thank you, Dr. Mcknight. We do have a hard out at 8:30, so let's fit in very quickly 2 more questions. Caitlin Pease from the Bethesda Beat, first you, and then we'll go to Donna St. George.
Hi, good morning. So I guess knowing that there's been an increase in cases that we've seen in schools after every extended break, knowing that people are traveling, gathering, doing all of those things, I guess I've heard from some folks who are curious about why MCPS didn't have maybe a more robust plan to return back to schools, to possibly include things like test to return, or providing those rapid tests to families before the first day back to school to kind of mitigate some of the impacts that we're seeing now.
Good morning, Caitlin, and it's good to see you. Thank you for that question. A couple of things I want to say there. MCPS has been planning for this. I mean, we recognized when we were returning to school in the fall, anything could happen when we had to pivot, getting prepared for the Delta variant. And so the main part is we have to depend on resources that are available for us to be able to operate schools. We are a school system. When it comes down to getting resources and support, and I want to emphasize the support, because the workforce challenges that we are thinking about when it comes down to testing and all of those things, it's not just an MCPS issue. It's an issue in our entire county and our entire nation. And so you have to take all of those things into consideration when we plan for testing. And again, in the largest school system within the state. Now, with that said, we have done some things. We have ordered rapid testing. We are going to have rapid tests in our schools for every single student and staff member to be able to communicate with us what their testing status is so that we can utilize that information appropriately. But Caitlin, I do want to say this because I do think it's very important. Closing schools is not going to solve the problem of COVID-19 spread. And I strongly believe that. Schools are just one entity that are one part of a community. If we were shutting down our government, if we were putting in capacity limits in other spaces within our community, then I absolutely would not be concerned. Or I would be concerned about putting our families at risk in a different way. But that's not the case. And so I don't believe that shutting all of our schools down, and when we say for a short period of time when we're depending on resources, and here we are in a snowstorm. I saw that today on the news, there are some people who expected to be able to come down 95 and they're stuck there for 12 hours. I guarantee you there's some truck on Interstate 95 that is expected to deliver some type of resource to us. And here we are again impacted. And so when I talk about the flexibility and the grace that we have to provide, today is a perfect example. And so even though we're planning to get these resources, we will get them in. We will hand them out to our students and to our staff to make sure we have the information that we need. But again, I continue to emphasize, I do not believe that closing down a school system is going to solve the problem of spread of COVID-19 in an entire community. And short of thinking about the logic of what happens when we shut schools down, and the impact on students, and we haven't made any adjustments otherwise, then I would, say then we have to really focus on how do we look at the impact of education in the big picture of everything that we're trying to do. So we're here committed, and we're going to continue to work with our county government and everyone else. But we do want to protect the interests of our students and staff, keeping them safe, but also protecting teaching and learning for our students. That's why we're here, and that has to continue to be the priority that we take into consideration.
Okay, thank you. The last question can now go to Donna St. George. Those of you who have other questions, my email is in the media advisory. You may reach me there. Donna?
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Dr. Mcknight, can you describe how large the staffing shortages are? Are you missing 10, 20, 30% of teachers, bus drivers, or cafeteria workers? How are the staffing shortages you described affecting the operation of the school system and the school that students are returning to?
Absolutely. Thank you, Donna, for asking that question. So when I think about staffing shortages, we're talking about staff that we still have to hire because we have been impacted by the labor shortage. We've shared that, at this point, again, not as in more dire situations as other places, but being short still around 100 bus drivers, and then putting into consideration the other part of the shortage is when staff members and their families have been impacted by COVID-19 and have positive cases for themselves or someone within their household, then they can't work. So that's the other staff shortage that I'm speaking of. And so as we think about, and we monitor our subsystem every single day, the amount of subs that we need for teachers and other staff members. But if we are starting out and we are short, let's say 300 teachers in the system, and we have an opening day of school and we have 800 staff shortages, then we then have to depend on a substitute system that has 800 people who are coming in to care for our children. And so when I say staff shortages, I'm speaking of positions that we did not hire for, impacted by the labor shortage. And on top of that, staff who are unable to come into work to support our students in whatever capacity they support them in, but not being available to do that. And so every single day we have to look at this. And I continue to emphasize, Donna, this is why it takes a community effort for all of us to have the appropriate information, act on that information that we have, and most importantly, plan ahead and be proactive in everything that we can do when we are together to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We are in a profession that requires personal interaction. That's it. That's what educators do. When we work with children, when we work with families, that is about a connection that has to exist. And so I continue to elevate that because as we just continue to say, how are we going to operate as a public education entity, we have to continue to remember this is a system in which children need to be able to connect with adults who they are learning from and learning with and connecting with. And the best way to do that is in person. And so as we speak about the staff shortages and we connect and we continue to hire And we are continuing to have many job fairs. Even I think just a couple weeks ago, we were able to bring on and onboard 130 different staff members in different areas of our system. So it's something that we continue to work on, but it shows our continued commitment to call upon our community to come and work in Montgomery County Public Schools. And if you feel like you can serve in other entities as volunteers, as other supports in our schools to help us to address these staff shortages, we welcome our community to do so.
So there aren't numbers.
We're done. I'm so sorry, but we are out of time. Our executives do need to get to another meeting. I've already kept them 5 minutes too long. And you can reach out to me and I can work on your questions. Thank you, everybody. Dr. Mcknight, Dr. Bridgers, Ms. Rubin, Jimmy DeAndrea, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Mcknight.